It's been more than a year since the Elden Ring craze of 2022. People were going insane, and everywhere you would look, Elden Ring was populating everything and everyone's mind. There was no hiding from it. Gameplay videos, praise, and hype all over the place was everywhere. And in all of this hype, all you could hear is just positives and praisings of the game, while negatives were completely drowned out. But not anymore. Hype more or less settled. Game runs and works properly everywhere now, and now we can actually discuss whether this game is actually worth it to buy right now or not. So without further ado, let's just get it started. And as always, as every single one of my videos, I'm going to be giving you the answer right away to not waste your time talking around positives and negatives just to get to the same conclusion. And the answer is yes, Elden Ring is absolutely worth it. Elden Ring deserved to be the game of the year 2022, and it deserves to be bought and played by every gamer. But don't get me wrong, being worth to buy and play doesn't mean that you will definitely like it and love every single part of it. This game has issues, and a lot of it, and many of those issues are game breaking for many people, and that's the things that we'll be discussing in this video. So let's talk Elden Ring. First, let's debunk one rumor that some people for some reason are trying to spread, and that is the game being actually dead. No, game is not dead, and very far from it. Even more than a year since its release, game boasts 30 to 40,000 concurrent players on Steam every day, and that's just not talking about any other platform. But for a few of you who have never heard of this game, what is it? So Elden Ring is an open world Souls-like RPG, and it will be very familiar for the people who played any of the Souls-like games, like Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Sekiro, and Bloodborne, because this game is done by the same people, and it's almost the same thing, but in an open world and not as linear. You're dropped in this dark and gloomy open world, and your goal is to become an Elden Lord. That's literally the main info that you're given in the beginning of the game. Game does not have quest logs, even though it does have quests. Game has very little exposition, and everything that you need to be discovering about this world, you need to be doing it yourself, and I mean literally yourself. At first it might seem tedious, but in reality it's actually quite a fun and interesting experience, because every single individual will discover this world in its own way. There is no hand-holding, and you can literally go anywhere, at least more or less anywhere, right from the get-go. Not that you can beat any enemies, any boss from the very beginning, but you can try. And the atmosphere in the world of the game is insanely beautiful, and there's nothing like this, except maybe other Souls-likes. It's at the same time beautiful and gloomy and very atmospheric, and every part of this world is oozing with lore and history, and you will want to know more about everything and everywhere. But if you don't care, it's also fine as well. Game world is also quite large, and thankfully you have a mount, Torrent, to traverse these vast territories. And this mount also can be used in combat as well. Now, speaking of combat, the thing that most people actually love this game for, and the thing that some of people hate this game for, and it's because the game is difficult. Well, technically it's actually supposed to be difficult. This game does not have any difficulty sliders. Everything is at a default difficulty, and it is difficult. You cannot cheese through everyone and everything right from the get-go. You actually need to learn how to play the game. And when you will learn how to play the game, you will quickly realize that difficulty of the game is not an issue, because this game can be as difficult or as easy as you want it to be. It's that some of the gameplay styles are easier than the other ones. Now, speaking of the gameplay styles, game has multiple different classes, and all those multiple different classes allows you to have multiple different builds and change how you play the game in multiple different ways. Well, you see, most people who are complaining about this game's difficulty are playing only their melee builds, and usually those builds that they do are very unbalanced and not properly done. And for that reason, game can become quite difficult and challenging, and in many cases unforgiving. But if you want something easier, well, there is always magic, because this game has an outright broken magic system that will transform you into a powerhouse, and not just that, you will become the force of nature, destroying and cheesing everyone and everybody, and you will feel like you are that powerful. Also, if you're quite lazy, you can use summons in the game, basically summoning other creatures to fight for you, or distract enemies, depending on how you want to play it. So the issue with the difficulty of the game is very dumbfounded, because this game can be as easy and as difficult as you want it to be. But the main problem is not with that. So game atmosphere looks great, it can be as difficult or as easy as you want it to be. Game also quite large variety and bunch of things to do, meaning that no matter where you go, you will have something to do, and you will never run out of things to do, no matter how hard the next boss will be. And if the bosses and enemies are way too hard, you can always scale back, go to the easier enemies, and level up, and then get back to the bosses and eventually defeat them. The game is all about trials and errors, and you will have a bunch of trials and errors because game has a bunch of different RPG elements. the items and mechanics and things to collect and the weapons to collect and weapons to modify and armors and all those different things. There's so many different things in this game that you will not run out of things to do anytime soon. And the fact that your game can be invaded by other players at any time just adds to the flavor of the game. Other people can just show up and screw up everything that you do. Or you can just defeat them and show them their plays and who's the boss here. Or you can do vice versa by invading other people's gameplay as well. But you have heard a bunch of praise of this game. Now let's talk about some bad stuff that some of you might not care but others might do. First, let's talk about UI and how kind of complicated it is. For any person who have not played Souls-like games, this UI can be a little bit too complicated. Nothing exceptional and quite easily learnable, but just to get there, the UI could be a little bit better. Again, it just could be. The other issue that game has is bosses. Well, that's strange, right? Most people absolutely love this kind of games for the bosses, and that's an issue. This game has amazing bosses, and you will love them. However, the number of these unique and amazing bosses are quite low compared to other Souls-like games, and that is an issue because this game is much larger than other Souls-like games. And you will quickly realize, especially during an endgame, how repetitive some of the bosses can become. Because yeah, you will have repeating bosses all over the place. Also during the launch, there was a lot of issues with the balancing of the game because some bosses were way too difficult in an endgame, while others were quite easy. Well, I can safely say that the most of those issues have been fixed because the game has been rebalanced multiple times since its release. But you cannot do a lot of different things with the repetitive nature unless you will use some mods. And let me touch mods a little bit later. Game also had a bunch of different technical issues on launch, and I can safely say that most of those issues are fixed, but yeah, game still has some technical issues. Also, the load screens are not the best. It's not as bad as Starfield, but it could be better, especially on a PC. Game also has much better PvP now, and with the addition of PvP Arena, PvP is actually quite interesting gameplay type right now. And that might be the reason why a lot of people are still playing the game. But now let's talk about an elephant in the room, and it is replayability. Game is quite long, don't get me wrong. It will take you around 60 to 100 hours to complete the game. And yeah, that is quite long, and if you're going with the completionist, it will take much longer than that. But there is an issue of replayability. You see, with other Souls-likes, which were quite linear, more or less, replayability made sense. There were a lot of additional gameplay features. The atmosphere would still be the same, no matter what. Here, because an actual exploration of an open world is one of the features and one of the gameplay mechanics, well, you cannot play the game again for the first time. And a lot of magic wears out. And that's where repetitive bosses and small number of unique bosses will show itself. So even though game is replayable, I would not say it's as replayable as other Souls-like games. However, many of those issues can be fixed with mods. Like for example, you will have an ability to play as different bosses, or just change the mobs all around the game world, or even just shuffle the bosses in, well, boss fights and in dungeons. For example, you might meet early game bosses in an end game, or vice versa, just adding a flavor to the game. Also, mods allow you to rebalance some of the game and some of the weapons, making the game a little bit more interesting and much more replayable. But now let's talk about money, or rather let's talk about the pricing of the game. This game is full $60 game, and just like every other Souls-like games, it rarely goes on a sale. The deepest sale it has gone was 30 to 35% depending on the region that you live in. So if you're watching this one of those sales, well, go and get the game. This game is worth the price it's asking. And if you're not watching this during one of the sales, it's still worth the asking price. Plus, the game is far from the dead because game is actually expecting major content update with the Shadow of the Earth 3 expansion. And because a lot of players are playing this game, when you will complete everything, PvP is always viable, no matter whether you're playing in arena or you're just invading other players. Overall, this game is a fantastic experience, but quite flawed. But this flaws is not the reason to not experience this game. It just makes it a bit better, giving you more hope that future games will fix everything that this game had issues with. I suggest everyone to play this game, enjoy it, and let's hope for even better masterpiece in the future. And if you like RPGs and really don't know which RPG to play next, well, this is an entire list where you can just find out all the RPGs right here. Or you can just watch the video that YouTube suggested you to watch. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe as well. Take care.